Hello, welcome. My name is Andrew Miller. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for Avast Technologies and AVG Business. Today I'm joined by Ken Shaw. This is part one of a three-part series. It's going to be very exciting. I've seen the slide deck for part one and part two, and I'm excited, so I'm going to be seeing it. Part three, I can't wait to see that deck. It will be recorded, and there will be a follow-up email will go out shortly afterwards, so it'll probably go out tomorrow, which will give you a link to the recording of the webinar and give you a chance to register for parts two and part three if you have not. There will also, if your interest is piqued, there will also be a link you can click to get a deep dive technical demonstration of Infrascale solution. So that's part of the housekeeping around this. Now, today's agenda, Ken is going to talk about the evolution of ransomware and his three-step approach to protection. And then there's going to be an opportunity for questions and answers. So during the presentation, please use the Q&A pod to type in your questions. We'll moderate the questions towards the end of the presentation. Now, I've mentioned Ken's name twice, but let me introduce Ken Shaw. He's the founder and CEO of Infrascale, which is nice, but he spent a career in protecting people's data. Their company protects millions of endpoints. He knows this business. Now, his business started off as 2 people, and currently it's about 100 people, so as I say, he knows his business. The first time I met Ken about 2 years ago, I thought he's an entrepreneur. He knew business. He gave me the business case as to why Infrascale was the right solution. And then somebody else at the table asked a couple of technical questions, and Ken, without skipping a beat, answered those questions. So he's an engineer and an entrepreneur, understands this business, and Ken, I hope that's woken you up. I know you're in a different time zone. So please, take it away.
Thanks, Andrew. It's good to be here. It's, as Andrew alluded to, it's a little bit early here on the west coast of the United States, and I'm not much of a morning person, so this is a great opportunity for those of you in the audience to trip me up. Guten Tag to our German participants, and hola to our Spanish participants, and hey to our Swedish participants. And those are all the parlor tricks I have when it comes to European languages. But let me talk about the prizes we're doing in today's webinar. We're giving away one of the 3 things you see on screen here, either an Xbox One, an Apple TV, and a Parrot drone. I personally have all 3 of these, and I can tell you that they're all great. Who are we giving it to? The person who asked the most questions about the webinar using the questions tool. So here on the slide it says you can send an email to team@infrascale.com, but these things are far more entertaining if we do it live here while we're all together. So there's a Q&A tool in the On24 systems down the bottom of your screen. Find that tool. Start asking questions, and at the end of the webinar, we'll announce a winner for the person who asked the most. Alrighty, with that sort of preamble, let's dive in. Oh, so we covered this. This is me. Pleased to meet you. I think we've covered all of the housekeeping items here. Yes, we have. Right, so our agenda looks a little bit like this. First, we're going to talk about the evolution of ransomware. 2, we'll talk about the recommended kind of 3-step approach to protecting yourself against ransomware and sort of recovering from ransomware. Then I'll tell you a little bit about Infrascale. We're a long-term partner of AVG. AVG and Infrascale have been working together for many, many years to try and combat threats just like this. And then lastly, we'll do the Q&A where we'll do that prize giveaway. Now, before we do dive into the presentation, I've got a little question for everybody in the audience. And here it is. Have you or any of your customers been affected by ransomware yet? So there should be a poll on your screen, I hope there is, where you can sort of reach forward and pick an answer. But have you or any of your customers been infected by ransomware so far? Give you a few seconds there to answer that. I can't see the statistics on how many people have answered that, so I'm just going to go ahead and push to the next slide, and hopefully we'll get the results. There we go. Wow, 93% of folks on this webinar have already experienced webinar, or their clients have. Well, I guess 2 observations there. Firstly, you're definitely in the right webinar, and this webinar is going to mean something to you. You've got the context for sort of just how disruptive and dangerous the ransomware threat can be. So let's sort of dive in and take a tour of just the historical evolution of ransomware. By the way, interesting pull quote here, 91% of respondents in some research we did in North America said that they or their customers have been affected by ransomware. On this webinar, we have 93%, right? So that tracks pretty darn closely with our own independent research. And so when we look at the evolution of ransomware, a lot of people think this is a brand new development. And in fact, it's not. It's been around pretty much since the advent of the personal computer. So if you go back to the mid-'80s, there were a variety of different kits around that allowed employees to allowed humans, most often used by disgruntled employees, to dime bomb computers, right? So a close personal friend, and he tells a story about when he was at a very, very large company in the 80s. They fired the system administrator, and in a fit of pike, that system administrator basically encrypted all the core databases, not encrypted them so much as locked them. And the whole business fell to its knees, and they couldn't operate for days and days and days until they figured out, what had happened. So the early progenitors of ransomware, were 30 years ago. But this problem's become particularly virulent in the last, I'm going to say 5 years, but with real emphasis on the last 18 months. And so one asks oneself, why? Why this huge spike in the impact and the prevalence of this thing? And sort of in analyzing that, we've got, sort of our assessment. Our assessment is that there's 3 huge contributing factors to this spike in ransomware. And I'll deal with them in ascending order of importance. The first was the development of asynchronous encryption protocols. And this was throughout the 90s, right? But in general, the types of encryption that ransomware used wasn't super well developed until sort of about the year 2000-ish, right? That's a broad generalization, but the use of RSA 1024 and even AES, these encryption protocols are very, very difficult to crack. Very, very difficult, therefore, to sort of brute force your way back into your data with. So that's one thing. The second thing, which is very important, is the rise of incredibly powerful multi-core processors on our desktop. So, it's no joke when I say that the phone that I'm talking to you on, I got the new iPhone 7, which, by the way, I don't recommend to anybody, but the A10 processor inside that is geometrically more powerful than the computer that my father worked on at a very large insurance firm in the 80s, right? So the Moore's law has stayed consistent. We now have just insane amounts of computational power in our pocket and on our desktop. Why is this relevant? Because encrypting data is actually a very computationally intensive task. And so the prospect of encrypting one's entire hard disk drive, this wasn't particularly feasible in 95 or 2000, right? This is something that would have taken a month and been very, very noticeable. You'd be using the computer and it would be sluggish and, it'd be on its knees in terms of performance. These days, with the multi-core processors that have become sort of de rigueur, we don't even notice it. Ransomware can be working away in the background, encrypting a terabyte of data, and your computer's not going to miss a beat. So the advent of these sort of super powerful processors in our computers has been awesome for productivity, but it's had this unintended side consequence that it's allowed the ransomware guys to sort of have the tools they need to lock up your computer. The third thing, and this is by far the most important, is the advent of anonymous digital currencies. Ransomware is a crime, and it falls, just like its namesake, it falls in sort of the overall category of like ransom, kidnapping, extortion. I mean, the basic concept is that the bad guy is going to come in and take your stuff. He doesn't actually take it, he just locks it all up and encrypts it, and then demand a payment, right, to get it back. And that's where ransomware comes from. Now, the way law enforcement has fought that sort of racket for 200 years, 300 years, has been follow the money, right? And so whether that has been with crimes in the physical world, law enforcement would follow the money, or digital crimes, law enforcement would follow the money. With the rise of things like Bitcoin and Ether, where the money trail becomes completely anonymous and impossible to trace, now the bad guys can get paid, and get paid in a way that is safe for them. And what I mean by that is paid in a way where law enforcement cannot easily follow the money to the bad guy. And so that by itself is by far the biggest contributing factor to this explosion of ransomware, right? Because they now have the means to get paid without being caught. And so this, along with sort of three large trends, have propelled ransomware to being literally the #1 cybersecurity threat that planet Earth faces right now. And it's not in any way an exaggeration. So ransomware has now gone global. You know, this used to be targeted at Western countries, but this is now a global problem. You can read reports from Australia, from China, from Japan, from North America, even Canada, dare I say it. That's a little dig there for Andrew Miller. The second major trend is that ransomware started to target businesses. Early on, ransomware would target home users, right? They'd lock up your photos of your kids and say, give us $50 or $100 and we'll give you back your home photos. Well, the bad guys have gotten a lot more sophisticated. They're now going after hospitals and law firms and banks and, you know, anything that has serious infrastructure. Because if you're a hospital and your core system gets locked down with ransomware, paying $15,000 is cheap to get back up and running, right? So recently, the Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center did shell out $17 grand to get back up and running as their way of recovering from a ransomware attack. And then the third big trend is the sophistication of the programmers behind these ransomware strains. So, previously these weren't super sophisticated tools. They would sort of encrypt a few files on your disk. These tools can now interact with Active Directory. They can now troll across your network. They can now detect NASs and shares and self-propagate. So the actual sophistication of the code that's being running has spiked as well. And so a couple of statistics, right? This is the slide where we try and scare you, but I don't think it's much of a stretch with ransomware. You should be scared of this threat. And the one I want to focus on is the third one in blue. $209 million US was paid out in the first quarter of 2016. And it's combined that with the other stats, which talk about an enormous growth rate in ransomware. You're talking about $1 billion being paid out this calendar year in ransom. And it's going to be more next year. You know, we don't know how much more, but it might be 2 billion, it might be 3 billion. This is an accelerating problem. So we've got a criminal industry that overnight has been birthed and is netting the bad guys $1 billion, right? And that right there, it may not seem, the connection to sort of what I'm talking about here today may not be obvious, but it's only because of that economic incentive. It's only because this is an easy way for bad guys to make money that this is spiking and accelerating and getting worse and worse and worse. You know, for most of my professional career, cybersecurity attacks were generally directed at very big businesses, and your average small business didn't need to worry about a directed attack. Your average small business might get a virus or, you know, maybe subject to sort of script kiddies and digital vandalism, but you weren't going to get a hacker sitting in Minsk, you know, sort of trying to penetrate Billy Bob's plumbing in Mississippi. That was never going to happen. It is now happening, right? So this has now become a living for thousands of hackers around the world. We don't see this trend, you know, going away, right, because of that. So what do you do? Well, you've really only got two options if you actually do get attacked. If ransomware penetrates all of your defenses and you do get encrypted and you do get a notification or a ransom note, so to speak, you've got two options really. One, pay the ransom, or two, restore your systems, right? And so today we're going to be talking about both of these things. In particular, we're going to be talking about the restore your systems component of this. So let's then move to sort of the framework for protecting yourself and readying yourself for one of these attacks, right? So a three-step approach to ransomware. Pillar one of this is to educate your customers and their employees. I'll talk about this in more detail. Pillar two is get good antivirus protection, get perimeter defense, and that's where AVG comes in, right? And then pillar three is have a good backup and DR solution you can fall back on if your perimeter defense doesn't work, right? So this is the 1, 2, 3 approach of responding to ransomware. Educate, get AV, deploy good backup and DR. So let's, before we dive into the education, let's actually have a look at some of the attacks. Here on screen, a couple of screenshots of some real-life phishing attacks run by ransomware groups, okay? This Amazon one in particular scares me personally. I buy everything on Amazon, everything from like my gadgets and my toys through to my groceries. So if I got an email like this from Amazon, I wouldn't think twice, and I would almost certainly click on that. And I'm a pretty savvy user, right? And so you're getting these very sophisticated, very directed attacks being run by these groups that are using very familiar brand names like Amazon and others to lure you into websites that can then infect you. So that underscores very well why user education is our first line of defense when it comes to ransomware. Our employees are our best source of defense and our weakest link, right? And that applies to you in your business as a technology partner or reseller, but even more importantly, it applies to the employees of your clients. You've got a fiduciary responsibility to your clients to prepare them for ransomware attacks. And part of that means educating their employees about the prevalence of this threat and the forms that it can take, right? Now, this is actually great for business because this gives you a reason to engage. This gives you a reason to go on-prem with your customers. This gives you a reason to run like a little free training seminar for your customers, all of which is a great platform for you to be selling anti-ransomware services into those customers. So the user education, not only do you have sort of a moral and ethical professional duty to do this, it's actually also a great business opportunity for you. Also, another tip here, there are firms out there now that will actually do simulated pen tests into your customer's environment. So things like Wombat and FishMe, these guys they'll simulate a directed attack on one of your clients, just like a ransomware hacker would, and then they will report back to you where the vulnerabilities are. So check that out. That's pretty cool. So pillar 2, have a multi-layered defense strategy, right? And so AVG, trusted partner of Infrascale, we've worked together for a long time, world leader in antivirus and security and protection for both consumer and business. And so using AVG products, I guess, or other vendors' products, you've got to implement a multi-layered approach to ransomware defense, right? Signature-based AV tools, container observation with advanced heuristics, even some more modern solutions where we're using crowdsourced intelligence and alerting. Couple that, of course, with AVG's smart and dynamic scanning and ransomware decryption tools, you've got a good set of toolkits there to sort of build a wall around your castle and make it less likely that you're going to get attacked, right? And so, with any security threat, there is no silver bullet. But by putting in place the right tools, by putting in place the right security tools in particular, you can very substantially reduce the risk that a ransomware infection is going to get in. Nevertheless, unfortunately, there's still a very high percentage of times. Some people say it's as high as 50% of times that ransomware infections happen despite the fact that AV is installed, right? So, I sort of joke that we used to have a slide in this presentation where we had Liam Neeson from the films Taken, where he's got that he says that line, I have a very particular set of skills. And the joke is this, in the physical world, ransom's all about kidnapping. And so if somebody kidnaps a friend of yours, that's horrible. And obviously you can do everything you can to prevent the kidnapping from occurring. That's AV, right? It's like the bodyguard. But if the kidnapping did occur, then you want to be able to call someone like Liam Neeson and say, hey, go and get my friend back, right? So in this metaphor, AVG is the bodyguard. They're going to prevent the kidnapping from occurring. But then Infrascale is the recovery crew. If you did in fact get infected with ransomware, we're the guys you call to sort of get yourself back to normal, right? And so there's two different tools you can use if you've been infected to rollback time. First is sort of enterprise backup and recovery, and hopefully all of you have deployed backup. And the other is DR as a service, or DRS. I just want to briefly explain the difference between these two. Generally with backup and recovery tools, the time it takes to get back up and running is measured in hours or days, okay? With DR, we generally measure it in seconds or minutes. So at the top of this slide, we've got the backup workflow. So in the green, we're backing up, we're backing up, we're backing up, and then a disaster happens. And then we go into this long restore process where we're copying binary data over a wire. We might be copying it over a wire from a tape array, from a disk array, over a wire from the cloud, but we're always doing a fancy copy of our data back. And then after we get our data back, we'll boot up and run. And that's usually hours or days. In the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy in Manhattan, I was in New York last week, it took 3 weeks for most financial firms to recover using backup and recovery tools. 3 weeks of downtime costing the New York economy trillions of dollars, and that's not, hyperbole. So DR takes a different concept. DR is this idea that in the aftermath of disaster, seconds count. So with DR, we're backing up, we're backing up, we're backing up. The disaster happens. We want to press a magic button and boot up and run our machine somewhere else almost instantaneously. So Infrascale provides both of these solutions, obviously at slightly different price points, right? So I'm going to talk in more depth about these as we go forward. Okay, so when you're looking at backup solutions, a few things to look for. Make sure you're getting a business grade solution, right? Consumer backup tools really aren't going to cut it. Look for anomaly detection in your tool. What's anomaly detection? So backup vendors are in a unique position. We get to see every file that changes in an environment, right? And we generally do it, at an aggregation point, like a server in the network. This actually allows us to do clever things. For example, it allows us to detect when a bunch of your files are changing in a way that resembles a ransomware attack. Okay, so we can help detect for you that you've been infected. Other things to look for in a good backup tool: unlimited version retention, obviously cloud support. These days, you should really be backing up to the cloud. There's no reason not to anymore. It's got to work for your servers and for your laptops. Bare metal backup options, so you can recover back to dissimilar hardware. Should work on all of your major devices, whether that's a laptop, a desktop, or the various flavors of server, right? A physical server running Windows or Linux, or a virtual server on Hyper-V or VMware. And then when you look at disaster recovery, the things to be looking for, first and foremost, is actually this second bullet, the guaranteed SLA for recovery. You want to know from your DR vendor, when things go bad, how many minutes until I'm back online, right? And so disaster recovery is an interesting phrase. Normally, when people think disaster recovery, they get very biblical in their thinking. They're thinking, sort of floods and fires and famines and locusts. But of course, this is not the most common IT disaster. The most common IT disaster is, some poor schmuck kicked out a cable and the server went down, or a motherboard fries, or, a CPU goes bad, or whatever, these micro failures. And on the rise, and is now statistically noticeable, is ransomware. Ransomware is now one of the most common disasters hitting IT infrastructure around the world. And I wouldn't be surprised if next year it's the #1 disaster to hit businesses around the world, right? So when we've identified a disaster, it's all about the recovery. You want that guaranteed SLA to get back up and running. Other things to look for is support for bootability, both on-premise and up in the cloud. I'll talk more about that soon. Again, you want to be able to protect both physical and virtual environments. Orchestration, unlimited testing, a whole bunch of other features I'll talk about at the back end of the presentation. All right, so that's our framework. But what do you actually do if you get infected? You come into the office, or more likely one of your clients calls you and says, I've got a ransom note up on my screen that says I have 30 hours to pay 500 Bitcoin. Well, again, you've got a 1, 2, 3-step approach. Number 1, get that computer off the network so it can't infect other nodes. Number 2, figure out when the infection occurred, and that's tricky. I'll talk about that in a second. And then thirdly, roll back to the day before. Turn back time, in the immortal words of Cher, to the day before that infection occurred, right? And so removing the machine from the network's, fairly self-explicable. But when we talk about detecting when you're infected, this is quite tricky. People think, hey, I got the ransom note on Tuesday, so I must have been infected on Monday. Well, that's bollocks. You were probably infected a month before, and the ransomware was sitting there quietly working away in the background, right? So the ransomware algorithms are getting more and more clever, and they are maximizing the amount of time they have to encrypt data before they notify you, right? So actually figuring out the day you were infected is tricky. And AVG's got tools that can help you do this, and Infrascale's got tools that can help you do this. So between the two companies, you're absolutely going to be able to figure out when that original infection occurred. right? So inside our tools, we've built in anomaly detection, which will actually allow you to set sensitivity levels using statistical standard deviations, which is a fancy way of saying this. You can tell our program to say, hey, Infrascale, if you notice a bunch of my files being encrypted, tell me about it, right? And then, once you've determined the rollback point, it becomes very, very simple to just go into our tool, open up the calendar view, and roll back. So there's a very small screenshot. I don't think you can tell, but in this screenshot it says June 2016, and I have selected here the 30th of June, right? But let's say I discover that I was infected by ransomware a long time ago, and this is not a real-life example, but let's say I was infected on May 12th, 2012, so 4 years ago. Then I can roll back to the day before. Now, this is super cool. I'm not aware of any other vendor on planet Earth that does this at this point. So most cloud backup vendors will store your data for 30 days. We store your data forever. These screenshots are actually taken from my account, and I can show you my account as of January 1st, 2011, 5 years ago, and I can roll back my computer to any day between January 1st, 2011 and today. So this is a cool feature of the Interscope Cloud Backup Platform that, firstly, you don't need to worry about storage in the back end. It goes to our cloud. Secondly, we keep all of those versions, and we do it at our cost. You're not paying for all of that. If, on the other hand, you're using DRS as a service, it's a slightly different approach, right? Your end users are working away. Ransomware hits, so they can't work anymore, so they call you. It's always 2 in the morning. In the olden days, you'd get out of bed, put your boots on, jump in the car, drive to the data center, and start copying data over a wire. With Infrascale, you roll over, grab your iPad, log into Infrascale, find the office in question, and hit the play button. And I literally mean the play button. Within 15 minutes, all of the affected computers are going to be virtualized, injected into cloud hypervisors, boot up, run, and then networked back to your customers or your users, right? So you didn't even have to get out of bed, and you can bring back an entire network of up to 200 servers running in the cloud, right? So for us, this is the holy grail of sort of responding to bad things, where bad things could be anything from, flood fires, famines, locusts, all the way through to the chump who kicked out the power cable, or, more appropriately for today's topic, a ransomware attack. So let me tell you a tale of 2 universities. The university in Canada who had a problem, and their name is escaping me for one hot second. The University of Calgary in Canada. I think you probably would have read about this. They had a chap who'd been working on some research there for many, many years, a professor, and ransomware got in and encrypted all of his work product, all the intellectual property of his 20 years of research. And they didn't have appropriate fallback systems. They could not roll back time. So they ended up shelling out $16,000 to recover his work, right? Now compare that to the experience of the University of Virginia. Ellen McCree's a system analyst at the University of Virginia, a lovely lady, and a partner of ours, customer of ours. She was recently attacked by ransomware. And what's interesting is they specifically went after the part of UVA that manages all the money, right? Sort of because these universities have huge endowments. And Ellen, upon being infected, didn't bat an eyelid, right? She knew she had Infrascale in place. She had tested the rollback procedure. So she notified her boss, she notified all of her colleagues and staff, and she rolled her system back and got it back up and running within 1.5 hours. Now, you might be saying, Ken, you guarantee 15 minutes, so why did it take 1.5 hours? It took 1.5 hours for her to get approval from her boss to do the rollback, right? And then when she hit the button, it rolled back within a couple of minutes. So, what a dynamically sort of contrasted experience Ellen had to the poor guys at the University of Calgary, who not only were down for days and weeks while they tried to figure out other approaches, but then ended up shelling out the dough anyway. All right, so let's now, we have another poll. So this next poll is, when it comes to backup and disaster recovery, which of these statements best describe you? Number A, I'm not happy with my current backup or DR system. B, I'm happy with my backup solution, but that little drowsy rollback thing you were just talking about sounds pretty cool. I'd like to learn more about that. Or option C, I'm happy with that BDR solution. I'm just here to learn about ransomware. So leave that up on the screen here for a hot second. And I hope lots of you are asking questions for the Q&A. I will be answering all those questions at the end of the presentation, so don't be shy, and we are of course giving away one of those prizes. Oh, I'm just looking at the Q&A stream now. Good, we've got a lot of people putting questions in. Good. Okay, so let's go ahead here and see the results. Have a look. All right, well, look at that. That's insane. 33.3% per topic. That's the most even split I've ever seen in a poll. Unless only 3 of you voted and you picked one of each. But let's bang on. So let me tell you a bit about Infrascale. So Infrascale's sort of founded on this idea, this almost Robin Hood-esque idea that every company depends on data and operational uptime for their survival and should have access to best-in-class disaster recovery. Heretofore, only the biggest companies on earth have had the ability to fail over their systems in minutes, right? You know, the Global 2000, although, I'm not sure if this made news in Europe, it's not universal. A couple months ago, Delta had a system failure and 3,000 flights got grounded. 2 weeks prior to that, Southwest Airlines, another massive airline, had system outage and 1,100 flights were grounded. So even though the big boys typically have great protection, they don't always work, right? In fact, and these statistics are US specific, but you'll get the gist. Computer system downtime cost the US economy $110 billion last year. And yet, the US spent $12 billion on backup and disaster recovery solutions. So I deduce from that 2 things. Firstly, the backup and disaster recovery solutions that we have are quite expensive because $12 billion is a lot of money by anyone's standards. And secondly, the backup and disaster recovery tools we're using must be junk because we still had $110 billion worth of economic damage, right? So these are the things that Infrascale is setting out to attack. So Infrascale's mission is pretty straightforward. A mission is to eradicate downtime and data loss in that order, right? Our first order of business is to get you back up and running and do that in minutes. And then our second order of business is to get you your data back so you can resume normal operations. Okay. And our solution, Infrascale guarantees system failover from any disaster in 15 minutes or less at a fraction of the cost. IBM's the world leader in DR. Infrascale will get you back up and running 5 times faster, and we're a fifth the price of IBM, right? So 25 times more value. And so, major use cases for the Infrascale solution. Well, ransomware protection, being one of the most common disasters we face today. Cloud backup and recovery, as we talked about. And then push button failover, this DRS thing that I was talking about. These are sort of the 3 major use cases for the Infrascale platform. And so to sort of put this in context, I like to talk about what I call the data value pyramid. If we take a given business, let's take a 200 employee hospital, right? That hospital is going to have endpoints, laptops is basically what I mean. They're going to have 200 of those, and that's going to, they're important. Generally, there's not going to be anything on those laptops where if you lost it, the business would stop running. You may experience all sorts of other risks if it went missing, but probably your enterprise won't grind to a halt. Then you got your remote and branch offices. These are like, you know, the medical clinics that the hospital supports, for example. And then you've got your core data center. This is where, you know, this is sort of the centralized data center where most of your apps are running. And within that, you've got your mission critical stuff, which is usually going to be your ERP. You know, if we're talking about hospital, we might be talking about like an Epic, right? And in general, these top 2 rows are usually protected today. You've usually got backup or DR installed to protect mission critical workloads and your core DC workloads. But usually your remote office and branch office workloads and your endpoints are not protected, right? This is a pretty normal situation. So we come along and we say, well, that's silly. You really should protect the entire stack. So this is another cool thing that with Infrascale, for one very affordable kind of subscription, you get tools for all of these. You get a failover for your mission critical workloads where we can bring you back in 15 minutes. You get backup and DR for your core data center, but you also get a really terrific solution for your remote offices and branch offices as well as for your distributed endpoints. And so what do we, oh, okay, sorry. So just delineating between those 2. The cloud backup, this is what I was talking about earlier, where we're backing up data to the cloud, unlimited version retention, and in the case of a disaster, we're going to give you your data back. when we're talking about DR, we're talking about that thing where in response to a disaster, we're going to give you back running systems in the cloud, right? Not just one running system, we can do up to 200 running systems for you at once. So just, a few sort of things about us, like why should you work with Infrascale? The Gartner Group's a very well-respected research firm. They last year they called us their cool vendor in business continuity and DR, which I think is funny. It's like we're the coolest company in the nerdiest sector on earth. But this year they put us at the top of their visionary quadrant. So it's hard to see here. You can get the full report on our website. But up in the top, these are the leaders, right? It's sort of stodgy old companies. You've got IBM and HP and Microsoft who will sell you incredibly expensive solutions that don't work particularly well. And the bottom right-hand quadrant is for the visionaries, the guys who are shaking the industry up. So we come along and we'll do it at a fraction of the price point of an IBM, and we'll do it we'll bring you back up and running 5 times faster than an IBM, and most importantly, we'll guarantee that. We guarantee the 15 minutes, which is kind of unheard of in the industry. And so what do we run on? Well, we protect almost everything from mobile devices through desktops and laptops, physical servers running Windows, Linux, or Unix, and then virtual servers running either Hyper-V or VMware. In terms of operating systems, running within those virtual environments, as I said, Windows, obviously, Mac OS X, Android, when we talk about applications, Exchange and SQL Server are very common. Working on VM, we run on VMware, Hyper-V, and frankly, more than 100 versions of the various major operating systems are supported. It's a great support footprint. And when I say the cloud, just what am I talking about? Well, we work almost everywhere. We can run on your cloud if you have your own cloud as an MSP, or your own data center, we'll run there. Our cloud, Infrascale, runs a global network of cloud data centers. For our European customers, we have one in London, one in Ireland, one in Frankfurt. We have 13 others around the world. And then lastly, we run on third-party clouds. So if you're already working with Amazon or Azure or Google, we can run on top of those. So pretty much any cloud infrastructure. And then, of course, the other thing we do is we sell appliances. So if you want to sell appliances to your customers, you can buy Infrascale appliances as well with our software installed. And so another big question, I guess, well, Ken, how is this safe? How can I know that my data is secure? And the answer to that is what's called double-blind encryption. So this is another reason why we've won so many awards, and it's another reason why AVG chose us as a partner, is that we're very anal about security, right? And so before data leaves a customer's premises, it gets encrypted with a key that only the customer knows, or maybe you as the partner know. Comes over the internet to us in an encrypted tunnel. This says SSL. It's actually now TLS, which is more secure. Then it hits our data centers, and we encrypt it again with a key that only we know. Okay, so when that data is being stored, it's in 2 encryption bubbles, and the only way to break that would be to get me to cooperate and you to cooperate, just like a safety deposit box at the bank where you need the customer and the manager. And if you don't have both of us cooperating, that data is useless. Now, again, in security, there's no such thing as a perfect solution. There's no such thing as a silver bullet. But that double encryption approach, or double-blind encryption, geometrically reduces the risk of a breach. If Sony had been using Infrascale, the hack wouldn't have happened. And so this also then means that we're compliant with pretty much every regulatory framework out there. We're HIPAA compliant for healthcare. We're SSAE 16 compliant for all serious businesses. We're compliant with the EU Data Protection Directive, which is very important. We'll keep all German data in Germany. We'll keep all British data in Britain. We're Sarbanes-Oxley compliant here in the US. We're CJIS compliant here in the US. Here's sort of another slide that talks to our scale. We have 1 million devices being protected today. This little map here, each red dot represents a business being protected with Infrascale. We're in more countries than the United Nations. There isn't, I think we did the count, we think there are like 4 countries on Earth where we don't have a customer. So 1 million devices. As you can see, the eastern half of the United States is just covered, sort of completely painted red, and most of Western Europe as well. So a very heavy presence in Western Europe, with 900 partners around the world across 50,000 business customer accounts. And so, hang on, I'm going to just jump forward to some of our customers. University of Virginia, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the top 4 global accounting, technology, and consulting firm, the American College of Surgeons, Pepsi Cola, you've probably heard of them, Lockheed Martin, you might have heard of them. So a lot of very serious folks using our tool to keep their infrastructure protected. I'm going to go back a slide now and talk about what the next steps are, because we're about to go to Q&A, but I just want to give you next steps. This is the first webinar in a series, so please attend our next set of webinars. And Andrew will give us a bit more detail about when that is. But the other thing I'd like to invite you to is a product deep dive. So if you go to infrascale.com/events, you'll see a series of webinars coming up. And the product deep dive is really cool. Seeing is believing, and I think you should really drill into what the product does. And of course, here at Infrascale, we're 100% channel focused, right? So we only work through partners like you. And as part of that product deep dive, you get to also see all of the different features we've built into the tool that make this a very channel-friendly and elegant solution for the channel. Now, if you go to that link and you don't see an event that's convenient for the European time zone, just wait half an hour. We're in the middle of updating the page. The events that are on there right now are in the European evening, and then we're about to put some up there that are during the European daytime. Okay, so, we've done the customers. So we have our last poll question, and then we're going to do Q&A. The last poll question is this: would you like to learn more about Infrascale's backup or disaster recovery solutions? And I very much hope the answer is yes. And if not, that's okay. Perhaps you'll come back to one of our webinars in the future. Let us know, and our chaps will be in touch with things like free trials, evaluations, product walkthrough, and really just get you more educated on what we can do in your business to do 2 things. 1, protect you and your clients from ransomware, and just as important, help you drive new, sticky, recurring revenue for your business, right? So DRS is a wonderful new revenue stream for your business, and we want to help you add that. So let's leave that poll on the screen there for a little bit, but I think, Andrew, we've got some questions, and I see my buddy David Hadsmer's on the line too. Maybe Dave's going to jump in and answer some questions too, Dave. You didn't know I was going to do that. But Andrew, you there, mate?
I am here. So thank you very much, Ken. So I've known you for a couple of years. I've been working with Dean. I've been working with Margie. I had seen this deck, but the color that you supplied as you delivered was really helpful. So I've made a page with the notes here. But some of the questions that have been asked, you've already answered during the presentation. So let's clear these rather quickly. How can we best protect against backup files being affected by malware and other threats? I think this was your anomaly detection.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me get some comments. One of the biggest, this is not just a backup thing. So what I'm about to say is going to be a pitch for Infrascale specifically, right? A lot of what I said today applies to the broader industry, but most backup tools age out your data, okay? So they'll keep your data for a week or 2 weeks, and then they age it out. Well, here's the big problem with that with ransomware. If the ransomware is actually sitting there working away for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and if your backup system ages out old data after a month, then your backup system is going to fail you when you go to recover. Because when you go to recover, you're going to recover an infected system with partially encrypted content. This is where Infrascale's unlimited snapshots become awesome, right? Because we won't age your data out. We won't delete that data. And so once you figure out where the data to roll back to, you know you can roll back to it with us, right? And that is different to every other vendor out there.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm filtering the questions based on ones you've answered during the presentation. Is there a draft solution for user machines?
By which I suspect you mean laptops and workstations. Yeah, yes. Currently there is not. So none of the major vendors provide a viable draft solution for end user machines. And I can't say too much, but I will say this. Check back in with us in January of 2017, because things might change.
Thank you. So there's a couple here that are probably long answers. Which is more cost effective, backup and disaster recovery or prevention measures?
that's a fool's choice. You know, that's like saying which is better, a poisoned orange or a poisoned apple. So you've got to have both. You have to have prevention and you have to have remediation. If you go with a strategy where you're going to rely on one of those, you are going to get in trouble.
Perfect. Just to add a bit of color to that, there was a recent ransomware case where a hospital paid the ransom to the bad guys. They paid it in Bitcoin, which of course is untraceable. Their data was not decrypted because the bad guys made a second request for a ransom. So one, you can't trust the bad guys. And two, if you have a backup of your data, you have options, you have alternatives. So it's a 1-2. I don't know which is more important, but you must protect your data and you must have a backup. So you need both. Does encrypting your own data help prevent your data being hit?
No, it doesn't, because they'll just wrap another encryption layer around it, and the fact that you encrypted your content doesn't help you. The bad guys don't care what your data is. They're not trying to look at your data in the context of ransomware. They're just trying to make the data unavailable to you. Now, encrypting your data is a good step, and again, that would have prevented the Sony breach as an example, and that would have prevented all of these incredibly embarrassing WikiLeaks breaches that are going on right now. So encrypting your data is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but it will not protect you from ransomware.
Okay, there's a question here. Does ransomware fall more into malware or antivirus for detection? I think that's more my question than your question. Typical antivirus was recognized based on signatures of data and the content of a file. Today's antivirus solutions, like the AVG solution, also looks at the behavior of those files. So those files are opened up in a secure virtual container, and we use a combination of artificial intelligence and algorithms to look at how does it behave. If it tries to write a file, if it tries to decrypt a file, if it tries to write something to the app data path, we will qualify that as a threat and we will quarantine it. So is that malware detection or is that antivirus protection? It's 2016 antivirus protection. Question here, why are we only seeing it more publicly? Why is ransomware only being made more public now?
Because people are talking about it, and by the way, it's really not being made public. There are probably 1,000 attacks for every one you hear of, or 10,000 attacks for every one you hear of. Like, I don't know this to be true, but I would, I'd bet you my pinky that most of the Fortune 100 have been hit by ransomware. But they aren't going to put a press release out or come out and say, yeah, we got hit, right? Shareholders don't want to hear that. They don't want to share that with other attackers to highlight the fact that they're vulnerable. So we don't hear about many of these attacks. We don't hear about most of these attacks, frankly. But we are starting to hear about some. Some firms are taking the position that it's best to talk about this publicly to raise awareness. And, I'm grateful to those people who do that, like the University of Calgary. They're quite forthright about what happened to them because they wanted other universities to be aware and to be prepared. But most attacks go unreported.
Okay, I'd like to add three points to that answer, Ken. One of the reasons we're hearing more about it now is we just recently finished a study and we surveyed 450 customers. Only 2 of 3 had heard about ransomware. 1 out of 3 has not heard about it. So it's not necessarily public, but it's very much a threat. 93% of all phishing emails, so those emails that are trying to be compelling enough that you click on them or follow a link, resolve back to some sort of ransomware attack. So ransomware is picking up. The other thing is ransomware as a service came out last year, where for the price of $39 US, you can buy your own ransomware kit, you take your own email list, and you are in the ransomware business. As long as you're asking people for Bitcoin, that untraceable currency, the cops can't find you and the other bad guys can't find you. So there are more people doing it and there are more people jumping on the bandwagon because it's easy. There's a question here. Would publicizing it raise public awareness? I think, Ken, you addressed this in your education step, that If we increase awareness as to what some of these phishing emails are doing, we can reduce the human error that's involved. Of course, having your data backed up is a wonderful solution to get around that human error.
Right. And I will say this, whether, look, so if you're, oh, sorry, Andrew.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so look, if you're an MSP or a reseller and you have 50 clients and one of your clients gets attacked with ransomware, you don't need to put a press release out to make this public. What you should do is call the rest of your clients and say, hey, listen, one of my other clients just got hit by this and here's what happened and it was bad. So let's talk about how we can, you know, prepare you for this sort of a situation. So there's sort of different levels of awareness and public disclosure. I would very forcefully say to all the technology resellers on this line, you've got an obligation to tell your other clients when this happens, and you have an obligation to prepare them and to educate them. So yeah.
Okay, there's a question asking about the effectiveness of the decryption tools. The decryption tools that AVG has, if you go to our blog site, which is now.avg.com, you'll see there are 7 decryption tools. Last month there were only 6. We're constantly adding new decryption tools, and the blog entry will describe to you how you can figure out what ransomware you've been infected by and how you can decrypt it. So the tools are quite effective. Ransomware is constantly morphing and changing its attack vector, and the people in our threat labs so far are able to keep up with the decryption tools. Let me just go through a few more questions here. Okay, is there a simple guide to help users from getting ransomware? Yes, there is. If you've been an AVG partner for a while, you'll have seen our ransomware campaign, and each of the ransomware campaign links back to a kit. And a kit contains a set of infographics and instructions on how you can create awareness and educate your install base so that they won't click on those compelling emails.
And Andrew, Infrascale's got a few resources in that regard as well. So, you know, we've got a couple of ebooks that are easy reading that you can also sort of send to your customers and distribute around. So that's another resource for AVG partners.
There's a question on how many data centers do you have? Now, you mentioned you had one in the UK, one in Ireland, I believe, one in Germany, and 13 more around the world. Did I write that down correctly?
That's right. So we've got 16 that we run ourselves, and then we can run on top of any Amazon location, any Azure location, any Google location. In addition to that, we'll run in pretty much any private cloud environment, whether you're running OpenStack, VMware, or Hyper-V. So, you know, we're a pretty resilient little organism. We'll pretty much live anywhere.
Okay, there's a question here on ransomware specifically. Do they actually get the unlock keys, or is this a further scam to get bank details? My answer would be you can't trust the bad guys. In the case of that Kansas hospital, they were ransomed twice. They paid the first ransom, and then they were asked again to pay. So the best prevention is to have that defensive perimeter and have a backup of your data so you have alternatives in the event you are attacked. I think we've got most of the questions have been asked either through the presentation or afterwards.
And one question here from an audience member. In your experience, is it easier to sell DRS to types of customers like health, finance, and legal? The answer to that is absolutely. So the sectors where we see DRS as being very popular, finance, health, legal, law enforcement, banking, credit unions, anybody who's, you know, anybody where system downtime is going to cost them a lot of money. Okay, so think a hospital. Hospital goes down, they're in a lot of trouble. So anybody where system downtime will cost them a lot of money is one big, you know, bucket of customers. The other is where data is very valuable. If you're a law firm, your documents are your lifeblood, and you actually have a legal responsibility and fiduciary responsibility to your clients to protect them. So law firms, therefore, are really good customers for this sort of a thing.
Okay, there's a number of questions on specific pricing and specific performance. I would recommend that each case is probably slightly different, so the best thing to do is to reach out to your account manager, describe your particular situation, your data protection needs, and they will put together a plan for you with appropriate pricing.
And for everybody who's asked a question, if we haven't been able to get to it during the webinar, you will get an email later today. Well, sorry, over the next 24 hours, someone from Infrascale is going to email you with the specific answer to your specific question. Okay, so don't be concerned if your question hasn't been answered here this morning. I guess this afternoon for you all in Europe. We will be getting back to you.
There's a question here. I believe you answered it during the presentation, Ken, but I think it's important to reiterate. If the data is always there, but the infection was 2 months ago, what happens to the data saved in the backup? I believe you addressed this with the rollback capability. You were able to roll back a couple of days, or was it back to 2014, you said as well?
You can roll back to any point in time, Andrew. So in my demo, I was showing off a little bit. I actually showed a rollback to the year 2012. Right, so if you're a customer of ours and you start today, you'll be able to roll back to today, for time immemorial. So, yeah, we keep unlimited snapshots of your environment, and that doesn't cost you anything extra. That's done on our dime. Perfect, because I do know there are ransomware variants that lay dormant for a number of weeks in order to defeat the backup strategy. So that's incredibly important that you keep those multiple versions around. Bingo. Okay, there is somebody asking for access to the kit. All the questions are logged, so what I'll do is I'll reach out to folks who may not have received the emails about the kits. We'll get those out to them. The access to the ebooks, Ken, I believe those are all posted on the Infrascale website. I know that's where I've seen them. They're all publicly available? That's right. They are all publicly available, and also when you become an Interscope partner or just get a trial, and you can contact us to get a trial, guys, that's really easy. Inside our portals, our Partner Resource Center, which is incredibly rich with resources, advertising material, ebooks that you can give your customers, rebrandable presentations and quoting forms, like just an entire library of sales and marketing material that you can rebadge, put your own logo on, and great material to help educate your customer base and help sell your services. Okay, I just swore through the rest of the questions. I think all the questions have been answered either directly through the presentation or in the Q&A section at the end here. If anybody has any last-minute questions, if you could please use the Q&A pod. Our show is being 2 minutes before the top of the hour, so I'll give you a 2-minute warning. We'll be shutting down the webinar. But any new questions, please type them in, and we'll see what we can do about addressing them. And there's one question here I see, Andrew, that I want to answer. So Andrew Higgs asked, we use Datto for most of our customers. How do you compare to Datto? Andrew, Datto is an amazing solution if you've got, an environment with sort of 5 employees, 10 employees, maybe 20 employees. If you're dealing with sort of more complex environments, I'd recommend that you look to more robust solutions, frankly. So, if you're talking about a 50-person, 100-person environment, or if you're dealing with complex environments like VMware and Hyper-V, you want to look at a different vendor, would be my thought there. And so, Andrew, should we go ahead and announce the winner of the Xbox or the Apple TV or the Parrot drone? I think we should. Andrew, you still there? Yes. So I believe I believe that Dean was going to share the name with us. Dean has shared the name with us. It is Mr. Higgs from Barclay Communications, Andrew Higgs at Barclay Communications. So Andrew, we'll be in touch with you for logistics where you can choose which of the toys you want. And so if you can just chat in with us and let us sort of know where you're based, and we will coordinate to get that prize out to you. Congratulations. So, Ken, thank you very much for a great presentation. There's a lot of great information there. I hope everybody got as much out of it as I did. Bear in mind, this is part 1 of 3, and there will be an email follow-up in the next 24 hours that will link to part 2 and part 3,
And also the link, if you're excited enough to want a deep technical deep dive on the Infrascale product, that link will be available too. So thank you very much for your attention, and we'll call the webinar to a close. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.